Ayo, Plaidman here. So today I kind of want to talk about a hot button issue that's been a little bit on my mind, or rather in the periphery. I made videos before about porn industry, or I guess it's YouTube. You're supposed to say corn, whatever. So the porn industry and the prostitution industry. And interestingly enough, I mean, if you go back in time, the saying goes, the oldest profession in the world is prostitution. So people selling their body for money. A little bit later than that, it was selling it for labor. But I guess before that, I don't know. It's an interesting question as to whether or not selling oneself. No, I feel like exchange always happened. So if I moved a rock for you, then would need to pay me, some of the saber-toothed tiger that he killed. So I guess maybe not the oldest profession is prostitution, but it's right there. And so it's always been there. And in certain cultures, certain parts of the world, it's still legal. And in other parts of the world, one could argue more civilized parts of the world, it's very much illegal. Like in America, where I live. Now, some parts of America, like I believe Las Vegas, it's not illegal. Like you can partake if one wants to. Now, what's interesting is if you take this old profession and you move into modern day, what you have is, there's really no way to make this kid appropriate. Sorry, I was just realizing that. I was like, oh yeah, my friend can show this to his son. And I'm like, please don't show this to your kids. This is just not appropriate. Maybe to talk to them about the subject, but not to be like, let's watch Plaidman's perspective on this subject. So, simply put, here's my issue, is that the corn industry is bad. It's bad for everybody involved, from the people doing it, from the people selling it, from the people filming it, from the people consuming it. Every person loses. Even if they're making money, they lose, because it is so deeply negative towards society as a whole. It's just not good. One could argue similarly with like illegal drugs, what we construe as illegal drugs. But even if you take the legality out of it, drugs, the manufacture, distribution, sale, purchase, and consumption of them is a net negative. It just is. Like, nobody wins. So why do we keep doing this? What's the solution? What have you? Great question. I don't really know. I don't really have an answer. I can hypothesize, which is what I'm going to do. But what I wanted to talk about was corn specifically, in that my solution, ironically, is to start dialing back, because corn is basically an answer to a problem. There is a problem, which is, I don't know how to say this delicately, but the idea that men need release. Okay? Now, in an ideal situation, they would get a girlfriend and then get married, and then they would have a release, and they wouldn't need this other outside source. They would have their spouse, and they would be happily married and happily get released regularly. But that doesn't happen all the time. And so because it doesn't happen all the time, you get exceptions where guys need a release, either because they're not happy in their marriage, they're not in a relationship, or whatever. I mean, bad things as well. I'm not trying to advocate for that. But it's just kind of a thing that's widely understood to be the norm. Now, I don't subscribe to the rule of thumb that men will implode if they don't release ever so often, right? This concept of balls that are blue, and if the guy doesn't do anything about it, then bad things happen. I don't think that's the case. I don't think there's any science really to back up that either. I think it's kind of a thing that guys feel a certain way, and they've allowed it to be kind of a wives' tale of sorts. So that being the case, where we're at is, okay, so we have the corn industry. Before that, we had prostitution. Usually, primarily women selling their body for money, and then that was just an old thing that happened. And now we had technology come about where suddenly, actually before technology, you would have whorehouses, which was kind of the upgrade of that. So there was a certain level of like, hey, come here. The women were cleaner because they weren't just like following army camps around, so they were cleaner. There's a higher level of quality. Sorry, my cats are being silly. Quality and stuff like that. And as you have more and more people come together, that's what would happen. And this is just not just America. Like Japan had this, Europe has this. Like it's everywhere. And different people have different ways to go. Go to Amsterdam, and they have a whole street that is in some part dedicated to this transaction. And I've heard during World War II, they'd have like in Thailand or even on American soil. I want to say they had it in Hawaii, where it wasn't illegal. And so because of that, and you had so many American soldiers, they kind of enforced this other thing of like, okay, the women, the prostitutes need to have like their paperwork in order. They need to be clean. They need to be this. And it was a little bit more regulated. In part because the military didn't want their soldiers getting some STD through this thing. So that was the easiest solution to do that. So anyhow, so we move from following the local army around to big cities get established. You get a facility, you get a brothel, and then you have the advent of the internet. And you kind of get this hodgepodge of stuff that start coming out where it's like, oh, instead of having a brothel and people go, you could effectively make the brothel online, and you're not selling sex anymore, but you're selling imagery, pictures, the idea. And that has bloomed exponentially in the last 10, 15 years, 20 years rather, into what it is now, where there's a whole thing. You start with, Instagram models where it's free and exotic, whatever. And then it gets into OnlyFans, and that can be a wide range of things. And it's like a monthly subscription to, again, free stuff on the corn aspect. And that can lead to all these other things. And again, it can lead into this paid subscription model. And the corn industry is massive. We're talking about a multi-billion-dollar industry. And I was listening to a podcast where people who are part of the biggest corn website, sorry, I'm just using the word corn now because it's easier to say that than the other one. And they're basically justifying. They're like, we just took over ownership and we're trying to do this and we're trying to make sure there's not underage corn on our website and yada, yada, yada. And it felt like, listen to the whole thing. It just totally felt like a PR thing. And they were doing a by the numbers, but trying to be sincere about what they were doing. And it was like, okay, I understand you bought this thing and you're doing it for money. It's for profit. They're not trying to be the benefit of mankind. However, it just totally felt like they didn't care at all that they were, effectively trying to sell people stuff on their way to hell, or even contribute on their way to hell, which in my opinion is, I'm not necessarily, I'm using hell as a metaphor, not necessarily biblically, but my thinking is not unlike theft, where you have high tier thieves or criminals. They usually start very small. You get the same thing with high tier people who have erectile dysfunction. I don't know if you've noticed, but I've been getting a lot of ads for erectile dysfunction, and I don't have that problem. I don't know why they're sending it to me, other than I'm 37, about to be 38, and they're like, well, this is that age bracket. But to me, that is not really something that really was a known thing, or I think a real thing, until, I don't know, 20 years ago when Viagra was started. So what that indicates to me is either there has been an exponential increase of this particular problem, or more than likely there is that, and sorry, I guess I my own thing. There has been an increase in this supposed problem. And I think the solution isn't that they need a drug. I think the solution is they need to stop looking at porn. And for those of you who haven't, I think I've already talked about it. If not, I'll look at my history and see, watch the movie again and make a review about it. But there's a terrific movie called Don Juan with, oh my God, I can't remember, 500 Days of Summer, Joseph Gordon-Levitt. And he's like super juiced for the film. This very like cocky, awesome guy, yada, yada, yada. His thing is he can sleep with a beautiful woman, and then afterwards she's asleep and he has to go and like jerk one out. And it's like every time. And then he finally is with like his perfect 10 out of 10 girl, played by Scarlett Johansson. And he still has to do that. And it took him fudging up that relationship and getting with someone older than him. And it wasn't about the age, it was just about the older person happened to be like in tune with their body and their mind and help him get out of and break this circuit that he was in and help him get through his basically obsession with Korn. And it was so fascinating of a movie. Not that I specifically have had that problem, but I have interacted with Korn in the past and I feel dirty when I did it. And I imagine many other people do, but unfortunately it's kind of like this thing that has permeated society. So, and even on simple things where it's billboards and this and that, where because your society's got degraded to a certain point, again, going back to a criminal, they start basically doing little thefts, you know, at a local mart, and then it elevates, escalate. Similarly, if, and not to go back to like the 1910s or whatever, but women were dressed a lot more conservatively in the past. And now they're a lot more exotic, a lot more open. It is not uncommon to see a woman who's just basically in a bikini going at Home Depot. I saw one the other day and I was like a little awestruck, like, okay, fine. But in that, and I'm not knocking her, that's fine. It's socially acceptable for her to do that. She doesn't need to be attacked or ostracized. But I feel like there's importance to, as a society, start going the other way and being like, hey, let's be a bit more conservative about what our women wear. Let's dial back and start kind of really locking in on what these Korn websites can do and can show. And in the process of doing that, like for starters, making it so like if you're not 18, you can't be on there in the first place. That's a big thing. It seems kind of like, well, duh, but no, in many ways, there's no real mechanism that they've initiated to do that. Some states are doing it, but some are not. And my opinion is that to the degree that we start hemorrhaging the sheer volume of people going into Korn sites, I'm not saying block them altogether, because once you've established an appetite for a thing, if you just cut it off, like if we were to just cut off the drug trade, well, they're kind of two separate things. But anyways, if you just cut off the Korn industry, you're going to have a lot of issues. And as with anything, any addiction, if you will, I don't know if that's the solution. I think it might be better to like slowly apply some logic and common sense to the Korn industry where, hey, nobody can be on this video if they're under 18. Nobody can see this video if they're under 18. Like, just that. And just that restriction. And then secondarily, and this was kind of the point of the video, actually, was perhaps we should look at, as a society, and not ostracize women who just do prostitution. And here's why I'm going to say that. Because if you think about it, a prostitute, a lady of the night, if you will, or whatever, if it is done above board, not only is the money that she's making, if we're doing income tax, which is a separate conversation I want to have, if she's doing income tax, then whenever she gets paid, she's paying, so she's a contributing member to society, so that's great. And it's like a normal transaction. Her like health and whatever is covered to a certain there's a certain expectation of cleanliness and uniformity in the experience, okay? And then on top of that, you have men who might otherwise utilize other things like corn or whatever. If they go once a week, I'm just saying, to go and visit this lady of the night, that might actually alleviate a lot of their tension and their other things, because they are getting an output of like, oh, and then hopefully they'll get to a point of like, this is stupid. Why am I doing this? Let me just go find a girlfriend, whatever. It'll, I think, help bring the concept of finding someone that you love and being intimate with them and taking it out of this crazy world that online has made it, where it's just like all these different bajillion options which don't really exist, and kind of bring it back into reality and help people kind of, those who are so far removed, help them kind of get back to like realism and being there and kind of the point. Like basically, my point oversimplified is this industry, the industry of sex, has blossomed, has exploded into this huge thing. And what I think would be beneficial is if we start going like this and kind of bring it back to, if this is sex and lovemaking, at least bring it back into here, because so far it's way out here beyond. Just start bringing it back. And that's my proposition. That's my suggestion. I think it'd be interesting. I know that there's going to be a lot of people out there. I'm looking forward to doing a podcast and doing this, having this conversation. But who are going to be like, oh no, you can't do this with the corn industry, or prostitution should be illegal. It's totally bad. But I ask you this, like, what's worse? A woman intercoursing with a dude and then posting it online so that 100,000 people can watch that video, and it's online forever. It's forever online. So she gets paid one time, right? And he gets paid one time, and then them being in that video is basically forever on the internet. And as far as I know, they're not making buku bucks residual money from that. And even if they were, okay, like let's say if they got $1, which I'm sure they don't, but let's say they got $1 each time, so it gets watched 10,000 times, they get another 10,000 bucks. Okay, but now 10,000 people, let's say, have seen that video, and it's forever on the internet. If they decide to get out of that career and do something else, any partners they have, any children they have, any coworkers they have can always like look them up and find that video. So it's going to be really hard for them to like pivot into normal society. Whereas with a prostitute, I mean, yeah, you're having intercourse with a dude, but that's it. That's that one time. And then even if you do it 5 or 10 times, okay, and you're getting paid less, but that's it. That's the experience. That's it. It doesn't get recorded for posterity. It's not on the internet. And if you decide, hey, I don't want to do this anymore, this is gross, then you can move at it. You can change your name. There's no video recording of it. You can change states, change location. You can totally close the door on that life, and it, for the most part, will not follow you. And there's an in-between. I do feel like stripping is kind of like an in-between between corn and prostitution. Some would say it's not as bad as prostitution. And I'm like, well, you're right. However, a lot of strippers do prostitution anyways on the side. So there's that. And then on top of that, you're at a strip club and there's like 10, 20 people seeing you kind of shake your tail and whatever. And like that has its own like emotional baggage there as well. So I don't know. I would say it's a toss-up, but frankly, I might feel better about a prostitute than a stripper, because at least with the prostitute, it's a one-on-one transaction. Whereas, yeah. Anyhow, so that's my solution. That's my problem is the problem is the corn industry is so big, so bad, and it is only hurting anyone who consumes it, anyone who sells it, anyone who records it. Like any part you deal in the corn industry, you are tainted with this thing that is actually negatively impacting humankind as a whole. And one, you can look at some things. Hey, why is the population declining? It's not just their fault, but they have a significant part in it. the degradation of relationships. Again, not just them, but a serious component. Like marriages, boyfriend, girlfriend, all these things. So they're contributing members to these things. Okay. And then on top of that, you have pedophilia and child sex traffic and all these other things, which they contribute heavily or major contributors in this particular thing. None of these are good things. And none of these do we want more of as a society. So, frankly, if you're working in that industry and working in any industry, you should kind of evaluate as to how much is this industry benefiting mankind or hurting mankind. And it doesn't mean that you as a janitor cleaning, the corn building, you're a horrible person. I understand you need a job, but can you be a janitor somewhere else where they're not doing stuff that's negatively impacting everything? If so, you should. But that's kind of my overall solution is you have corn. It's becoming very problematic for society as a whole. Some of the ways you solve it is you hamper the amount of usage that people over 18, and then you have to be over 18 to do it and to consume it. So that'll hemorrhage it somewhat. And they're not going to like it. They're going to lose money, and that's fine. That's fine. It is indicative of if they resist, that's problematic. Why are they so about that? That's kind of a red flag, and which they are. They're like, oh, we don't like this. I'm like, okay, that's kind of weird. And then on top of that, think about, hey, is prostitution really worse? Or isn't it better than porn? Isn't it better than OnlyFans? Isn't it better than strip clubs? Maybe we should allow that to be legal, and we should kind of hey, be clean. Here, we'll set up clinics where you can get checked and make sure you're daily clean and checked, whatever. And check the Johns who go there, and everything's on the up and up, and it's above board, and it's not problematic. Because frankly, why does that not make more sense to have it oh, hey, you go to this one specific place to go and do this thing, do the tango, as opposed to randomly driving and having some woman you don't know at all just hop into your front seat and then you do the tango. That doesn't make sense. Why? And the logic is, well, we don't want them to do either. And I'm like, okay, but if they're going to do the former, if they're going to just pick up some random lady on the side of the road, then would not it be better if it was clean and legal and above board? Wouldn't that be better? So that's my argument, is that we're already in a bad place, and if we don't start cutting the negative decline, it's just going to get worse, and it's just going to it's bad for everyone. So perhaps we should start confronting that headlong and looking at the bad things that are happening, and maybe come up with some simple solutions to morally change stuff. But that is something that you as a viewer need to kind of judge for yourself and well, what do I think about this? Because ultimately you're going to have to vote on it and vote for people who might think that that's not a horrible idea. I don't know. You have to evaluate for yourself if you think that's a bad idea or if I'm crazy. By all means, comment, subscribe, check out for more videos. I got more on the way. This one's kind of been bugging me in the back of my head, and I was going to do a book review, but I was so I'll just talk about this. Anyways, I love you all. Plaidman out. Talk to you soon. Bye-bye.